This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to Fireside Adoptees. Part of our Adoptee Fire series is interviewing adoptees from our community. And we're very happy to have adoptee Kate Betancourt here today to share her story as an adoptee from Colombia. So we'll be very interested to hear what she has to say. She's going to talk to us about a number of things, not just her experience, but also some of the advocacy work that she does and the work she is doing with adoptees. So thank you so much for joining us, Kate. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you for having me and inviting me.
Great. I'll start with the basics. Can you tell us when you were born and where? And I know there are other circumstances we'd like to go into for certain about the conditions around your adoption relinquishment, but let's start with the basics about that.
Okay. I was born in March of 1978 in Colombia in South America. I really don't know much about my beginnings, should I say, except for what is on my documents, which is very little. And in my years of searching, I've also learned that the information I do have in my documents could be false, partially false, so I'm not really sure. All I know is I was born in a hospital. My mother left, according to the documents, left me there. I was in the hospital for 3 months, which I found out about 2 years ago, and then was transferred to an orphanage, and I was in an orphanage for 3 months. So I was adopted at 6 months and grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
And part of our discussion about the orphanage piece, which I'd like to go on into more detail later, is that there may be some uncertainty about which orphanage you were actually in. Is that correct?
I know which one I was in. It's called FANA. There's like hundreds of adoptees from there in our Colombian community. It's one of the 3 big ones at the time. One was called FANA, another one was called La Casa, and another one was Los Pisingos, and all were later investigated for illegal adoptions, falsifying records, changing names, changing birth dates. One is actually closed down, but the one I was adopted from was one of the big ones with corruption.
And in particular, you've said that you weren't sure why your parents adopted internationally. I know in our discussions privately, but you were adopted into a white family. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are a lot of things surrounding that, just the implications of being in that situation. But what was it like growing up? I'm sure you had a continual awareness of being different. And you've even said that maybe by the time you were 5, you had some acute awareness of being different from your family. And I wonder if you could tell us something about that.
I think my parents actually did tell me at the time why they adopted internationally. For one is because my mother had a baby that died a few hours after birth, and she was told that she couldn't have any more kids. So they decided on adoption, and I think she said it was just kind of, and I've heard this from other Colombian adoptees, that it was kind of the up and coming big place, easy place that was popular at the time to adopt. So say like China was a few years ago, it was Colombia. So there was an American group that they used to facilitate like the American side of the adoption. So the home study, all the legal aspects, and then this organization kind of facilitated the work with the orphanage in Colombia. So then they actually went down and got me there at the orphanage, brought me back. But yes, I do remember feeling very separate from them. I think I never bonded with them at all. I remember my mom telling me a story that I now see as like detrimental to my trust, and I think bonding with them. There was many things, but I think this shows where their heads were. They said for 2 weeks straight after they brought me home, I cried all night long, like screaming, crying. My mother said she wanted to comfort me, but my dad would not let her, saying I needed to learn how to calm on my own. So those of us who studied trauma or know anything about it, not only was I just, left in a hospital in an orphanage for 6 months, then I was moved to a place where the language was different, the smells were different, I was around strangers, and to not have them pick me up and make me feel secure in that time, I think was detrimental. And she said eventually I just stopped crying. And that's what babies do. When they learn that they can't depend on their caregiver, they stop. So I feel like that kind of, when she told me that, it made a lot of sense. And then subsequent things that happened in my childhood. So yes, I remember feeling at 5 years old, consciously thinking, these people aren't my parents. They can't really, I said, in my kid's mind, I was like, they can't really do anything to me because they're not mine. I'm not from them. So I felt very much like I was just living in their house. And I think my mom was borderline personality disorder, depression, a lot of neediness. She openly told my sister and I that she had kids so somebody would love her. So I was very much, and she was very much there to fulfill my mother's needs. And my dad was very cold and kind of distant. So I just kind of felt like I was on my own most of my childhood.
It's awful to have come to that awareness at such a young age for a child to have that kind of, when we talk about being self-aware people, but to have come to that conclusion for the most of your life now, to have known that, experienced that disconnect and known it was always going to be there is very traumatic, I imagine, and had to have shaped absolutely everything that's been in your experience since then.
Definitely. And I think that's kind of what led to my rebellious and kind of self-destructive behavior as a teen, is I was looking to fill that pain, that hole, that not fitting in. So I would glob on to like friend groups and do whatever I could do to not think about how I was feeling.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about, I know that there was a biological daughter who came along after you were adopted. Mm-hmm. And what were the dynamics like with her within the family, if you don't mind?
So 4 years after I was adopted, my mom got pregnant. She decided to chance it and see if the pregnancy would go to term. My sister was very premature, but made it. I didn't feel any real separation or difference when it was just me and my sister, like how we interacted. I saw her as my sister. She is my sister. She saw me as her sister. I think it helped that I was the older sister, and just in sibling dynamics. But everything was good with her and me. I did notice as we got older, their treatment of her was different, like in college years, and when it came to like needing help financially or expectations, they were always higher for her, and they seemed like they were kind of throwing in the towel with me. For example, when I asked for money for school, and my mom said, actually, we gave your share to your sister because we thought you wouldn't, we thought you wouldn't make it to college by the path you were taking. And so it's just like, thanks for that credit. You know what I mean? Like, thanks for the support. So things like that. And I think my dad one time did say, it's almost like it was an experiment. He said, it's very interesting to watch you and your sister because she's biologically related and you're not. And it's very interesting to see the differences in you guys. And it just made me feel like an experiment to him.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
See, you were experiencing a difference in treatment, but not anything from her, but the way you were interacting with, and they seem to have lowered expectations of you without even talking to you, huh? Just kind of, you found out the money isn't there. We gave it away. That must have been awful. I'm sorry that happened. And I'm sure that probably closed off certain opportunities for you at a point in your life when maybe things would have gone differently for you.
I think so, but I think it's the journey that we're on. I don't think I was ready at that time to do, what I was supposed to do, or what is the normal path, whatever that means for people. And I think as an adoptee that we're all able to do what we can do when we're ready, and I wasn't ready. So yes, it was not right for them to do that, but I don't think I would have taken that path at that time. I was too, I think, messed up in all my adoption stuff that I couldn't even do it.
Did the fact of being adopted weigh into your psychology as an adolescent? Were you thinking about the fact that you were adopted a lot?
Yep. I remember starting at 5 years old, every night before bed, I would lay in my bed and I would talk to my mom. And I didn't really know, like, obviously who she was, but I always talked to her. I always felt a huge connection to her. Never really thought about a father too much or any other siblings. It was just always her.
Yeah.
I did ask my mom one time, so when am I going to see my real mom? And she said, I am your real mom. And I said, no, you know what I mean, my real mom. Because as a kid, you don't have these words.
Right.
So she kind of, it turned around being about her because she was, upset that I used real mom. And so she was kind of arguing about me. So I just said, never mind. And I don't think I brought it up again to her. But it was always on my mind through my teen years. I think from like 13 to 17, I don't think it was consciously in the forefront of my mind. I think I was dealing with a lot of self-worthlessness, depression, feeling empty, feeling not good enough. And I turned that around to just hating myself. And so I think my teen years were just full of that, and I didn't connect like what any of it had to do with adoption until like maybe 19, 20 is when I started connecting it.
Yeah. I relate really strongly to something you said about the image of the birth mother. And I almost, until like the past year, wasn't even really aware that I had a father. It sounds strange to say. I attributed everything, and I've known her. We're not in a relationship now, but for almost 15 years, I've known her, and I've just tried to identify everything through her. Like everything comes from her, and I almost like I didn't have a father at all. And I'm just starting to come into reunion with his family, but I still don't get a sense of where I come from him. It was all very much, like you said, for me, about thinking about her exclusively, or the preponderance of what I was thinking of in terms of being adopted. So you went through, like you've mentioned, some unfortunate circumstances and risks in your young life. And then eventually you got to the point of thinking about searching, or you probably thought about it for a long time. But can you talk a little bit about what searching was like for you and the outcome so far?
Yes. It's a long story. It's been going on 30 years or so.
Yeah.
I started searching, I think when I was 18. And at that time, all that meant was going in the box, getting my documents, kind of looking at them. It was like right when internet was starting. So I think I like typed in Colombian adoption or something like that. And of course, nothing came up. I think my mom had a friend who was from Colombia who worked in law, and she invited her over one day, and she looked over my documents and said, oh, your last name Betancourt is a very like well-known name. And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, it's kind of like the name Kennedy, because there was a very famous daughter of a president by that name. It's a very wealthy family. And so her conclusion or guess was that because in Colombia it's very common for people to have like live-in maids, even like the kind of middle class people. So her opinion was that my father maybe was the husband of somebody I worked, like that my mother worked for, because that also is very common. And because she thought it was just weird that I had that last name. But this is all somebody's guess. So that was the first time I heard that story. So then I started kind of forming that story in my mind. Once, I think in like the year 2000, I got on the internet and joined my first adoptee group, which was Colombian adoptees only. So that was a huge like eye opener because I had never known there were so many of us and we all had similar stories. And it's just, you know, kind of that starting on the healing, connecting journey. Through there, I learned a lot about searching. So once again, I got my documents out, started looking over them, contacted my orphanage, asked if there was any more that they had. And they kind of gave me everything that my adoptive parents had always given me. So there was no new information. And basically all there is on my documents is my mother's name, and that's it. And what you need to search is her full name, which is 2 last names, because in Colombia they use 2 last names. Her ID number, possibly her birth date, possibly an address. None of that I have. Oh. And then in the last few years, I've looked at the documents, and even I always thought that she named me Tanya because my birth name was Tanya Betancourt. But on the hospital documents, I noticed it said NN Betancourt, so no name.
Oh, wow.
So I think I was named by some random person in the orphanage. So that was disappointing because that was kind of the one thing I was holding on to, like, wow, you know, she named me this. This is from her.
Oh, yeah.
And so that kind of got thrown by the wayside. So over the last 30 years, I've used 4 investigators, which I've paid for. I've been on TV, radio, and newspapers in Colombia, all telling my story. I've done all the DNA testing from all the companies. I've found 4 possible women with the right name that all lost children. And when I say lost children, they say they all had healthy babies and then were told their babies died. We're never allowed to see them. We're never showed a death certificate, and we're told to leave. And in my time searching now, I know that's a very common thing that happened to many poor women, young women, and their babies were placed for adoption. So hearing that story, I wanted to do DNA testing because it could be them. It wasn't. So each time that was heartbreaking for me and for them because they were overjoyed that they had finally found their daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really hard to break that news to somebody, but I'm still close with 2 of the families that I found. So it's nice to continue our relationship with them. So at this point, I've done everything. I even wrote to the hospital I was born in. They said, of course, they don't keep records from that long ago. And no real leads have come from any of my TV, radio, or newspapers. So at this point, my partner, who's an investigator, and a few other people I've talked to think that she used a completely false name. So I really have nothing at this point. When I speak to people, I just say, if you had a baby in between, let's say, February and May of 1978, it could be me. And a lot of times the women who had their babies taken were told it was a different sex. So they were told they had a boy, but they actually had a girl, or vice versa. So I also say, no matter if you had a boy or girl, if you had it at that time in that hospital, contact me because it could be me. So it's really just been 30 years of dead ends, and then hoping, and then a dead end, and then getting hopeful, and then a dead end. And so it is really hard. And as I'm getting older, I'm 44 now, it just makes me think, how old is she? And how much time do I have left?
Yeah.
And so that's really painful. And I feel like that's the place I'm at now. Is I've done a lot of adoption work over these years and worked on a lot of trauma issues. And I feel like I've come a long way in that. But the one thing I haven't been able to get over is, what if I never find her? Because I don't want to die and not know. That's my biggest fear. So even if she, you know, I also am not ignorant to reunion being some fantasy, you know, so I know that I might not like what I find. I might, you know, it might be a horrible situation or a bad family, but it also could be okay. I, at this point, would just be happy if I could get a picture,
Yeah.
because at least I could see that I came from somebody.
Yeah. I've heard you say that before in other meetings we've had, to know that you came from somebody.
Yeah.
And you know, it's
So, oh, sorry. About 8 years ago, maybe 9 now, I started helping other adoptees, other Colombian adoptees, kind of just teach them how to search, explaining to them what they need, how to do it, who to contact, helping them find an investigator. And then more recently, I've done searches by myself. I help my partner with a lot of searches, and recently become certified as a life coach, just so I can have something that's, you know, shows I put in some time and work on it. And I'm helping more people now just learn how to search, and because most adoptees, they don't even know Spanish. They have no idea how anything functions there. So they could think I have nothing and they show me their documents and they have everything they need, or they don't, or, you know, they need to go to this office first and then that office. So I kind of help them learn how to do it. And I honestly think, even though it's hard, because every time there's a reunion, I'm so happy, but I'm also very jealous. And it's like, why not me? What did I do? Like, why don't I get this? Why do other people get this and I don't? But it's also truly is awesome to see families reunited. It's wonderful to make those connections for people. It makes me happy to do it. And if I can't get anything for myself out of all of this, I just am happy I can help others. So
that's really wonderful. It's unfortunate that we run across people all the time in our community that, I think with the advent of DNA testing and the interconnections, social media, there's a lot of assumptions people have that I can just look whenever I want and then they'll be there when I'm ready.
yeah.
And we hear, like, from your story and other people that I know really well, that tragically that is not always the reality here. It's not a take it or leave it thing that people have. That information is just there waiting for me. You may really just not ever be able to locate and make the connections that your heart wants so desperately. So I really feel empathetic for what you've been through for so many years of searching, and just wondering, like, you're sounding out and there's no echo coming back to you at all. It's just into a void. And
Definitely.
that must be like for you. So I appreciate you sharing that. And certainly we wish you success on that. And
Yeah.
I know it would be facile for me to say, oh, that's next around the corner for you, because you've exhausted as much as you can right now. But yeah, thank you so much for being so genuine about that. I wanted to ask you about what it's like to be severed from your culture and customs, the things that you lost from being adopted, and what also it's been like when you have connected with orphanages in Colombia. I know you've done a lot of work and visits there. Could you talk somewhat about that for us?
Yes. I went to my orphanage. My first trip back to Colombia since I was adopted was when I was 36. I think it was 2014. And I went with a group of adoptees, which was nice, without my husband, without anybody. It was just us. And I really think that was the right choice, because it's such an emotional trip. Because a lot of people don't understand, when you're born here, people can say, oh, I was born at that hospital, I was born in this city, but I'd never set foot on the land that I was born in.
Yeah.
So even when the plane landed and we all stepped off, we all broke down in tears, because we were like, we've never been here before.
Yeah.
So going to the orphanage, I expected it to be hugely emotional. And I think the most emotional part, there's two parts. One was when we passed the baby rooms, as they're called.
Mm.
It was just a stark white room with glass window, lots of cribs, nothing in them, just everything stark white and bland. And the babies were in there and nobody was in there with them. And a lot of them were crying. So when I saw that, I don't know, I think it was the first time it was like a reality, like that was me. Because you hear this story and it just seems like such a story, like it almost happened to somebody else. But seeing those babies in there and knowing that I was there, just I think made it a reality. So that was pretty painful and sad and hurtful. And I just felt for those kids. And I wondered, you know, about all their mothers and if they're going to be searching in 18 years. The other hard part was, and I've showed you this photo, we were passing by, there's like, they had all the kids in like little classrooms according to age. So we walked by like maybe a 4 to 5 year old classroom. And it was during the World Cup. So we all had our Colombian independence jerseys. And so all the kids ran out and were like, hey, you know, and all, you know, trying to say hi. And the teacher told them who we were. These are all adoptees from America. They were here. They came back to visit Colombia and they wanted to visit you. And so immediately this little girl came up to me. So I knelt down and I could speak pretty okay Spanish. So I was talking with her. And she said, "You're from America?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Can you please, do you know my sister? Do you know my sister?" This is gonna make me cry. She said, "Please, can you find her? She was adopted to a family. Her name is, I think it was Sophia. Can you please find her? Do you know her?" And I just, like, my heart broke for this girl. And I just told her, you know, like, I don't, I'm sorry. And it just made me so angry, for one, that this family separation is still happening. It made me angry that they would separate siblings. It made me angry that this little girl is going to have to be in my situation and she's going to have to look for her sister. And it just boggles my mind how people can still do this in this day, as much as we know about, you know, trauma and separation. So that was really hard. Her name was Lorena. I still remember her name. But I think that brought it home too, just seeing this kid plead with me for her sister, and I couldn't tell her anything. I couldn't save her from everything that we all go through, that she's is going through and will be going through. So that was pretty hard. As far as the orphanages, that's the only time I've been back there. I do a lot of work with adoptees in my current job, which is on a child adolescent psych unit. We're a 14-bed unit, and typically we have 1 to 5 adoptees at all time, domestic and international, and a lot of foster youth. I feel like in that job, I can be what I needed when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, and being self-destructive. I can be what I needed for those kids, because I feel like if there had been somebody to intervene when I was a teenager who was an adoptee, that's what would have made my life go in a different direction. If I had been validated, if I had been listened to, if I had had people like this group, but that just didn't exist back then.
Did you feel I know you said you broke down and the whole group broke down when you first landed.
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced a big sense of disconnect from being Colombian? Is that part of your experience?
For me personally, I think I got pretty lucky in that department. My mother's adoptive mother's best friend, her husband was from Colombia. So I remember they invited me over when I was 10, and he made me Colombian breakfast, and that family kind of took me under their wing. So I do feel like I kind of got to grow up with that. That's and great. Most adoptees don't get that at all, like nothing.
No.
And so I had that family kind of took me in. My best friend was Venezuelan. Her family took me in, and I had a Puerto Rican family that kind of took me in. So I did get a good dose of my culture that I think really helped, because I can go to Colombia now and, you know, fit in per se, not completely, but I feel comfortable with it. It's normal to me. And I noticed that on my first trip back too, because I was more comfortable than the other adoptees I went with, just with the norms and what's expected and, you know, little things. And I'm super appreciative of that. I tried to instill that in my kids, and they also are very proud of being Colombian. And so I think that's one thing I've taken back, you know, as much as I can. I still do feel other when I'm there a little bit too, as well as here.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there's a kind of that saying, like somewhere in between. I never feel like I'm totally here, and I never feel like I'm totally there. And I don't really know if there's a bridge for that, because that's just my experience.
You feel between two worlds,
Mm-hmm.
and like you can't really be fully a part of either one, right? There's something that keeps you from being able to, and it's not a personal reservation of I can't commit myself to it. It's like something missing, right? Part of you just can't make that connection fully.
Yeah, because here, you know, with my family, I definitely don't look like them. Even though I have cut off ties with my adoptive mom, I still speak to my adoptive dad maybe once every 6 months or so, and see him every few years. But I definitely don't look like them. I still get questions about it. And when I'm there, though, when I'm in Colombia, I feel more connected. I feel more grounded. I look like people. But like when they're talking really fast Spanish or have like inside jokes or slang, like that's stuff that you pick up growing up. And I'm never going to be able to get to that level.
It's like a facility you'll never quite get to.
Yeah.
Even though you get very comfortable with other parts of it, there's that everyday familiarity piece that you'll just never have.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't your reality, unfortunately, and you can't assimilate it from
right.
Because you grew up one way, and to try to be immersed the other way, it just doesn't always fully connect, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to ask you about kind of the dark side of international adoptions out of Colombia, because I know you have a lot to say about that.
Well, during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were over 1,000 babies adopted every year out of Colombia. The 60s and 70s, there were more corruption than the 80s, but in the 80s, it was still there. It actually got shut down. Adoptions got shut down because of how much illegal adoptions and corruptions there were for a few years, and then reopened. It seems to be better now, but I still am in contact with mothers who say their children were taken because they were poor, or they said they were going to take them for a little while and then they're placed. So it's still going on. I just don't think at the same levels. But what was common to happen is that lots of young, poor women, a lot of them couldn't read, were either coerced, pushed into placing, or their babies were just stolen. Like the women who say they gave birth in the hospital, their baby was fine. Then a nurse or doctor comes in and says, your baby died, you need to leave. And they're not given a death certificate. Wow. And these women are poor. Who are they going to tell? Yeah. So they're not, nothing happens. It keeps going. Lawyers took part in this, doctors, nurses. A lot of people are connecting it up to even some of the orphanages. I know a good friend of mine who was in the orphanage with me, but he was born in a city across the entire country. So we're always like, how did you get to where you were? Who brought you? And so we're wondering about child trafficking, who's all involved in this? And I know another adoptee who was in the orphanage with me who found her mother, and her mother was working as a maid in somebody's house. Found out she was pregnant. Her boss told her, unless you give that baby up, you're fired. She had 2 other young children she needed to support. So this woman said, I know of a place that will help you and they'll place your baby, which was the orphanage I was adopted from. So her mother went to stay there because they also had like a woman's home for the mothers to stay there. She doesn't remember giving birth because they put her out. She doesn't remember signing anything, giving her baby. And when her baby was born, she said, I changed my mind. I want my baby. I don't want a place. And they said, if you try to get your baby back, we will make your life hell. And so once again, a poor young woman in the 70s in Colombia, which is super patriarchal society, they can't do anything. So she just left it. And I know of another story that a mother contacted, went every year to the orphanage I was adopted from, trying to get information on her son. Her son at the same time was sending letters requesting information on his mother. They turned the woman away every time, wouldn't answer her questions. And then I actually helped this adoptee search. We found her, and he found that out. So the whole time the orphanage was lying to both of them, telling them they had no information when both of them were trying to connect through the orphanage. So it's just a system of like lies, really, and keeping these 2 parties apart. And when our mother's placed in Colombia, they're stripped of all their rights. So they're not entitled to any information about where we are, who we're with, what country we've been in, brought to. So I know I'm contacted by a lot of birth mothers in Colombia who are like begging me to help them search. And I really say, like, you can't, because you would need your adoptive kid's current name, which they don't have.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Colombian adoptees in the US and Australia and Asia, all over Europe. So it's really hard for these moms to have any chance of trying to find us.
The thought of the lies that are told to the mothers who don't even intend to give up their babies, I can't imagine that.
Yeah, and I try to get that point across when I deal with adoptees too, because I talk to a lot of adoptees who say, oh, she didn't want me, she abandoned me. And I said, you can't trust what your documents say. You can only, once you find her and talk to her and you ask her those questions, that's when you're going to get, a more truthful answer. But don't base how you feel about yourself or your self-worth on the word abandoned or she, whatever your documents say, because you don't know if it's true. And so it's, I think, really important that a lot of at least Colombian adoptees know that, because some people build their whole lives on this story that's on your documents, and it may not be correct.
It's a really good point. And one I think it's great that you're bringing awareness to that. It would seem like people, I mean, the whole birth certificate, fictitious nature of it should be bad enough as it is, but to think, well, what about the things on there that might not be true, that are not just the obvious things of these were not my parents, but even more obvious things that, why would you necessarily just believe that? Or you form a narrative in your mind about what your bio family must have been like, and the conditions around being relinquished, and you really just don't know until you have some kind of contact or some kind of closure about that.
Yes, I know that there is a few organizations that are now trying to give like free DNA testing to women in Colombia who have placed or lost a child to adoption, because that's really the only way that they're going to go about finding us. And so there's kind of a big movement among Colombian adoptees to get tests down there and just start testing, because that's really what's going to do it for us. And down in Colombia, people don't have the dispensable income for a DNA test. They also don't have that same like desire to know, like, where did I come from? Who are, what's my ancestry? So it's not really a big thing there. So it's a big push to get women tested down there. And there have been adoptees who are thinking about having a movement to try to pressure ICBF, which is the Colombian kind of like child welfare service, to provide free DNA testing to women and adoptees, like as their obligation. So we're trying to get kind of those changes made to try to help reuniting and hopefully connecting more people.
I wanted to conclude by asking you about the interactions you sometimes have with adoptive parents, because you've mentioned that in your line of work, you see the whole spectrum of adoptive parents, and that some of them you think are much closer to getting this right than others. I guess I'll say it. I'm trying to be gracious about it, but can you tell me what you find is most encouraging with some of the adoptive parents that you interact with?
Yeah, some of them truly just want to listen. And you can tell that because immediately they either are super defensive. If I mention adoption, trauma, they close off, their face changes, their body language changes, and they are defensive, defensive, defensive. I even had a adoptive mother kind of like put a citation on me because I gave her daughter the primal wound. How dare I? But so, and my boss said, she filed this complaint, but we're not going to do anything of it. We know it's ridiculous. You had every right to try to give her daughter information. But it's, that's how threatened some adoptive parents are with this. They just can't even go there. And she swore her daughter had no issues whatsoever. But she was, whatever. So the parents that I do see difference in sit down and talk with me, and I can provide them with a list of books and a list of websites. And I talk about the trauma, and I talk about, our brain development and how we're different, and they actually want to listen.
Yeah.
And then they'll seek me out every day and ask me more questions and ask how they can do better, ask what they should say and shouldn't say, ask what kind of exposure their kids need to like a various culture, or ask for adoptee groups, or, they're actually just really involved. And I used to be like 100% anti-adoption. And I think I am more for guardianship and family preservation, of course, but if adoption had to happen, I've seen a few parents do it as best as it could be done, per se.
Yeah.
So that has changed my mind around, but it's so far and few between, I feel. The majority are not that willing to listen, unfortunately.
Have you seen any change based on the decade in which someone might have become an adoptive parent? Did you see people changing more recently than what they were like maybe when you first started doing this work?
Definitely. I have seen some more movement, and I feel like I'm not sure how much is lip service though. Like a lot of them use the correct terms. Like, I know my child has trauma. Okay, so what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Have you actually, it's trauma, but what is that? How are you parenting? What does that mean? How does that show up for you? Are you able to just listen and validate your kids without coming back, with a comment? Because most of the kids I talk to have never been able to even speak of their feelings of adoption, have never heard anybody else talk about it.
Yeah.
So what I normally do is go in the room and I'll just say, I'll start sharing my story. And then I'm honest with it. I don't sugarcoat it. And so then they kind of slowly start talking. And I think, so many of them have said, thank you so much. You're the first person who's ever listened to me. You're the first person who's ever said something that I feel. You're the first person that has ever just let me speak.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's so huge. And then I tell them, I give them resources. I tell them about groups. I tell them about books. and about, you know, the world of adoptees that we have that they can connect with. And it's like, that's what I wish I could have gotten at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that I can do that makes me feel, I don't know if it was worth it, but it's for a reason, I guess you could say.
I understand that, yeah. Well, really,
unfortunately, I see a lot of adoptees too that have dealt with abuse in their adoptive homes, mentally,
yeah,
physically, and sexually. And I was also sexually abused in my home and outside my home. So I think that in my line of work, being able to be there for adoptees like that is huge.
Any last thoughts you might have for us, Kate, or anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't addressed?
Just that I think international adoptees just come with like a little bit, you know, of an extra layer of separation, of trauma, because not only did we lose our parents in our family, we lost our culture, our language, like the experience of growing up there. As I said, I'll never be able to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really hard to reclaim that, especially if you grew up in a white family in a white area. How are you gonna like seek this out? That's the first thing a lot of adoptees say is, where can I get Colombian food? Where can I buy music? What kind of, you know, they're just desperately kind of trying to find out what it is, you know, what it all means. So I think that's just kind of an extra layer that we have, no matter what country you were adopted from. And then growing up with no like racial mirrors, without anybody that looks like you, it's really hard. I used to always compare myself to kind of the white ideal of beauty. And so for so many years, I thought I was fat. I thought I was ugly. I was teased about my nose, teased about my skin color. And it wasn't until I started connecting with more Colombians and Latino people that I was like, oh, I'm normal. These people do look like me. But you should have that growing up. You should see that within your family. So I think that's just really important to acknowledge and realize.
Well, we certainly are very appreciative of your time and your openness with us. And I know I've learned a lot and I've enjoyed the interaction. So thank you so much for your time today. And to everybody who's been on the call. What I'll do is in the recording now, you'll hear that it's going to cease here, and then we'll go into questions and answers. And at this point, just anyone who's watching, thank you for tuning into the Fireside YouTube channel, Fireside Adoptees, where you'll find this video and other interviews and resources. Thanks again.